guys, it's Lindsay. Welcome back to The Wandering Reader. Today I'm going to be doing my December wrap up, and I had such a good reading month in December. I managed to read 16 books, which when I totaled it up before this video I was blown away by. Such a good reading month, and I smashed my reading goal for 2019. But I'd done that earlier in the year, but I managed to read so many more books than what I thought I did. I had some lovely time off in December, obviously in preparation for Christmas, and then during Christmas it meant I could read even more. So I have lots to share with you today, so let's jump in. So the first book that I read in December was called A Family for Christmas, which encompassed two stories, one called The Gift of Family by Irene and the second called Child in a Manger by Dana Corbit. This was an ARC that I received for review from NetGalley and Mills and Boon. It was part of a promotion that they were doing because there were some Channel 5 movies coming out based on some of these books, so there is a movie based on Child in a Manger. So The Gift of Family is a story about Evan and Wendy, and at the very beginning of the book they get engaged, but then Evan is called because his dad, I think, has had some sort of a stroke, and he has to go back and help out on the, or basically run the family farm. And Evan and Wendy are sort of like university students, so that's where they met. And Wendy isn't very happy about this. You know, she doesn't like the idea of being like a farmer's wife and stuff like that, but she goes and spends Christmas with him, and it's about her sort of like learning whether she is, you know, capable of living that sort of lifestyle, but also like bringing religion into her heart, Christianity into her heart, because these are love inspired stories, and I've not read any love inspired stories before, so it was a bit of a different experience for me. I kind of liked this one. It was okay, but I felt like the religion was kind of like pushed a little bit too much in my opinion. I think I ended up giving that, I'm just looking at my review on Goodreads, 3 stars. And then Child in a Manger is about a woman called Alison who is sort of like in this nativity play that the town are putting on. She is a child like welfare officer, and they find a baby that has been swapped for the doll for Jesus, and they don't know who this baby belongs to. They've been dropped off with this bag with all of their stuff in, and she sort of takes the baby in and tries to find the baby somewhere to stay. Meanwhile, you've also got Brock, who's the hero, who is the sort of like local police officer. He's just moved to the area, so he came to the nativity play to sort of like see what the community was all about, sort of thing. And the two of them are trying to sort it out, and he feels like, it turns out that there's nowhere for this baby to stay over Christmas, so she ends up, Alison ends up taking her in for a few days, and Brock goes and sort of helps out, and it's about the relationship between the two of them. I thought this one was a lot better. There was obviously a religious aspect to it, but I didn't feel like it was too much in my face, and I like the story a lot better in this one as well. So I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars, and then overall I gave the book 3 stars. So I thought it was okay. It was a good enough read. They were sort of short-ish tales, so if you're looking for something, some Christmas stories that are sort of have more of a religious edge to them, and this might be something that you enjoy. Next up, I finished A Wedding in December by Sarah Morgan. This is a book that I buddy read with Sarah, another lady called Lindsay, and I can't remember, I think it was Alana. We did a big buddy read of this. It was on my holiday book bingo, TBR. This is basically focuses around a family. Maggie and Nick are the parents in this family, and they separated a few months ago. So Maggie is living in their old cottage on her own. And one evening she gets a phone call from their youngest daughter called Rosie, who has just got engaged and wants to get married, I think on Christmas Eve. is it on Christmas Eve that she wants to get married? I think so. So basically she obviously wants her family to come to the wedding and spend time with them, but obviously she doesn't know, not obviously, what she doesn't know is that her parents have separated, and Maggie decides that she'll go, but she doesn't want to tell the girls about the fact that her and Nick are separated, because, you know, it's their wedding, like, you know, it's Rosie's wedding, and she doesn't really want to sort of like take away from that happiness. So they decide to pretend that everything's okay, and then they'll tell the girls after the wedding. Rosie's sister is called Katie. She is 10 years older than Rosie. She is a doctor, and it's pretty clear from the beginning that she's had recently had something traumatic happen to her, but she's kind of like trying to hide it away, cover it up, you know, just kind of get on with life, but she is finding life really tough at the moment. And it's about this family, it's about all the different relationships in here, and it was just utterly delightful. So they fly out to America for Rosie's wedding, and her husband-to-be lives in Aspen, and his family own this big sort of like hotel resort, and they end up staying in these sort of like really charming little tree houses. And I really, one of the things I loved about this was the setting. It was very reminiscent of her Sleigh Bells in the Snow trilogy that was based on the Snow Crystal Ski Resort. I really liked that setting too, and I found this very reminiscent of that. So it was a little bit of nostalgia actually, even though I only read those books I think last year. But I also really liked the fact that you had the relationship between an older couple being explored in here, and the whole idea of, you know, being of parents being a parent overtaking what you originally had in your marriage, and, you know, that kind of idea. I thought that was really well explored in here, and I really ended up enjoying this, and I gave it 4.5 stars. Next up, I read The Kingmaker by Kennedy Ryan. This is book number 1 in the All the King's Men duet. The second book is out. The first book I think was released in November of 2019. So Lennox is our heroine, and we find out that she has some Native American sort of heritage. Her mum was Native American, and she sort of lives very close to this Native American reserve. And at the very beginning of the book we meet her, I think when she is something like 17, and she is part of this big protest to try and stop this energy company from putting in sort of like a gas line, which means that it will tear right through some of their land, and sort of like their some of their, all like their traditions will be ruined and things like that. And she meets Max there, who is the son of the owner of the energy company, who is completely outraged by what his dad is doing, doesn't really get on with his dad. He's a little bit older than Lennox. I think he's sort of like 5 or 6 years older than her. He meets her at this protest. She doesn't know who he is, and then the two of them meet a couple more times after that, and the book spans, you know, numbers of years. So we skip forward 5 years, and then we skip forward another 10 years I think, or something like that, and we see them at different stages of their lives. And this is the, like I said, the first book in a duet, and I really need to read the second book basically. The first book ended on a massive cliffhanger. You can get these books on Kindle Unlimited, so if you've got a Kindle Unlimited subscription, I would definitely recommend checking these out. This is yet another Kennedy Ryan book that I've absolutely loved. She is just so good at writing a really genuine relationship. She's so good at building up the tension between characters, but also she's absolutely fantastic at writing about such topical issues, and it had like a political aspect to it, an environmental aspect to it, and I just absolutely loved it, and I yet again gave it 5 stars. Next up on audio, I listened to Quit Like a Millionaire, No Gimmicks, Luck or Trust Fund Required by Kristy, Shen and Bryce Lueng. I have a physical copy of it here because I ordered a physical copy of it. But this is basically a book all about how Kristy and her husband Bryce retired in their sort of like mid-30s as millionaires, and are now travelling the world and that kind of idea. And she basically talks you through how she did it. And she talks at the very beginning of the book about her upbringing. She had a very humble upbringing where, you know, as a kid her family were very, very poor. I think that she lived in China and then moved to the States. You know, they used to pick through industrial waste in order to make sort of like little toys and things like that. Her family moved to America for a better life, you know, and she talks about how she went about becoming a millionaire and retiring early. And she talks you through all of the different things that she did and how you can replicate them. And there are chapters in here that are relevant to people that live in the US. So for example, one of the things that she talks about in here is that you need to get rid of all of your debt. And she talks about student debt in here, like student loans. And she talks about how you can sort of like zero out your loans or sort of pay them off a lot more quickly and things like that. And obviously that is pertinent to living in the States or in Canada. So that necessarily didn't apply. She also talks about how buying a house isn't a good investment. And again, because of like the laws in the States and Canada, the taxes that you have to pay on a property that you own means that it can be very, very expensive to be a house owner. And so, and that again, that's very, very different from the UK. So I found that bit wasn't exactly relevant to me. I feel like this is the type of book that I would have to read quite a few times in order to get my head around exactly how to go about doing things. It's not that her explanations weren't clear, because they were, and there are loads of charts in here, and in the audiobook there were PDFs that you could download and things like that. So I understood everything that she was saying. It's just that there was an awful lot to take in, and I feel like I would need a little bit more time to absorb everything that she said in here. But yeah, there was some really, really good advice, and I will definitely be picking it up again. And the thing about, you know, not being in lots of debt and things like that, I mean, not that we are in lots of debt, but it does make you think about different things in your own lifestyle. And she also talked about, you know, trying to save as much as possible, which makes me review sort of like how much we spend every month and things like that. So yeah, there were some really good lessons in here. So like I said, I am going to be reading this again and absorbing more from it, but I think I ended up giving this 4 stars in the end. Next up, I finished The Subtle Knife by Philip Pullman. This is book number 2 in his Dark Materials trilogy. And yeah, not much that I can say about this, because obviously it's the second book in the trilogy. The first book, Northern Lights, follows Lyra, who has been brought up in a college in Oxford, and she, her uncle Azrael comes to sort of visit her every now and again, and he's this sort of like explorer and scientist, and she gets caught up in this sort of like plot. I can't really say a lot more than that. I don't really know how else to describe it, but this is the second book in the series. It was really good to pick this back up again and sort of find out what happened to Lyra next. And it was especially good because I was watching the BBC adaptation of his Dark Materials alongside this, and there are definitely some aspects that they weave into that programme that are from the second book. So I felt like I was sort of reading this alongside it, and that was a good thing, because otherwise I don't feel like I would have known what those things were about. So yeah, that's coming back in 2020, that series. I'm just wondering how much more of the, you know, if we're going to get some of the third book that's weaved into the second series. So it makes me think I should really pick up the third book sooner rather than later. So it's a bit of advice if you're planning on watching the TV show. If you haven't read the trilogy, or if you haven't finished the trilogy I should say, then just watch out for that. But I did really enjoy this, and I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. Next up, I finished Regretting You by Colleen Hoover. This is another arc that I had to read in December, so thank you very much to NetGalley and the publisher for sending this to me. This is a mother-daughter story basically. So it follows Morgan, who at the very beginning of the book we sort of have this flashback to when she was 17 and she realises that she's pregnant, and then we flash forward to when her daughter Clara is 17 years old. She's married Clara's father, Chris. You know, her sister is in a relationship with, or just had a baby with, Chris's best friend, who I can't remember the name of now. And then something really tragic happens at the sort of beginning of the book, and it's about the fallout of that. And I really loved this. This is my first Colleen Hoover book, so I didn't really know what to expect from her writing, but I found it compelling. It explored things like family relationships, grief, growing up, finding out who you are, you know, the idea of things happening to you so young, and then you know, losing who you are along the way. I explored all of those things really, really well. And yeah, I really loved the characters. There was a great sort of like Clara and her sort of like her love interest in the book, again, whose name I can't remember off the top of my head. They were doing this film project, so there was a little bit in there about sort of like cinematography and, you know, coming up with an idea for a video, like that kind of idea, like it, and it was just brilliant. I really, really enjoyed it, and I ended up giving that one 4.5 stars. Next up, I finished Her Naughty Holiday by Tiffany Reisz. This is book number 2 in the Men at Work series, and this series that she has written follows different holidays. So the first book in the series was centred around Halloween, this book is centred around Thanksgiving, and then the third book in the series, which I haven't read yet, is focusing around Christmas. So this is the story of Clover and Eric, and Clover, our heroine, owns her own garden centre sort of business, which she started herself and built up from the ground. And Eric's daughter works for Clover. So she knows Eric, he's sort of being in and out of the garden centre picking his daughter up from work and things like that. And then at the beginning of the book, her family tell her that they're coming to her for Thanksgiving. She doesn't really get on with her family that well. They are always interrogating her about why she doesn't have a boyfriend and why she hasn't settled down yet and had children and things like that. And they don't sound like very nice people. They're not very nice people. And so she asks Eric to sort of be her fake boyfriend during Thanksgiving, so that, you know, she can get her family off of her back, basically. And it's about a relationship that develops between the two of them. It was really good. I liked reading about Clover's life and the garden centre business that she has sort of built up. Eric's daughter is a really, she's a really sort of quirky character. Before she got a job with Clover, she got herself into trouble, but basically doing things like protesting for the environment and stuff like that. And Clover gave her a job and sort of like put her back on the straight and narrow, as it were, and Eric's really grateful to her for that. And this was a really good time. I really enjoyed it. And in the end, I gave it 3.5 stars. Another arc that I read for the sort of like Mills and Bean film thing that the film promotion that they're doing was Prince on the Children's Ward by Sarah Morgan. This is book number 8 in the St Piran's Hospital series, and this follows Tasha and Alessandro. And at the beginning of the book, Tasha has walked out of her job as a doctor, as a children's doctor, because she saved the lives of these twins, and her manager wasn't happy with sort of how she did it, basically. So she walks out on principle and goes to see her brother in Cornwall, who works at a different hospital, to see if he has any jobs going for her. And he doesn't, but he says that somebody is looking for sort of like a private nurse who had an accident recently and needs basically nursing back to health. And he happens to be Alessandro, who Tasha knows from their past. He's her brother's like best friend, and they all were friends as children. but she and Alessandro happens to be the crown prince of some sort of province, I don't know, it sounds sort of like Italian, and he rejected her when she was sort of like an older teenager, and she's never really got over that. So she decides that she's going to do it because, you know, she wants to prove to him that she is over him, but also she wants to kind of get back at him in some sort of way. So she goes to live with him for a little while, and it's about a relationship that develops between the two of them. This is another Sarah Morgan book that I have ticked off of my list. I thought it was quite good actually. I like the medical aspect to it. I like the sort of like royalty aspect to it, although we didn't really see him in much of a royal capacity because he was sort of recovering at his house in Cornwall. But yeah, and it was funny watching her try and get back at him as well. So yeah, I did really enjoy this one, and I gave it 3.5 stars. Next up, I read A Wrong Bed Christmas, which is 2 Harlequin or Mills and Boon Blaze books. One is called Ignited by Kimberly Van Meter, and the other one is called Where There's Smoke by Liz Talley. And each story follows one of 2 best friends, and then yeah, the girls are best friends, but also the men are best friends as well. Yeah, they are. So the first story is about, let's see if I can get the names right, Alexis and Leighton. And Alexis is supposed to go with her friend to help out at some sort of party thing that her parents are putting on in this care home that they have. But she ends up hurting her foot when there's a guy in bed with her that she doesn't remember being there at the beginning, and basically they got their wires crossed and they didn't know that the women were going to be there, that sort of idea. So she ends up sort of like slipping over in her attempt to get away from him. So she has to stay behind, and Leighton, one of the guy best friends, decides to stay behind with her to look after her and make sure, you know, if she needs to go to A&E, he can take her, that kind of idea. And it's about the relationship between the two of them. And then the other book is about Emma and Eric, and she's always sort of fancied him, and he takes her to her family's sort of party, but he takes a shortcut and they end up sliding down some bank and not totaling the car, but they basically need it to be towed, and then staying in this really run-down cabin, this abandoned cabin, and sort of getting together during the night of that. These books were really, really spicy. Yeah, they're Blaze books basically, so that they would be like the equivalent of Desire books now, but they were quite good. I quite enjoyed them, and in the end I gave that one 3.5 stars. Then I read A Fortunes of Texas Christmas by Helen Lacey. This is book number 1 in the Fortunes of Texas series, and this follows Amerson and Robin. Amerson is a sort of French entrepreneur who has flown over to Texas to meet with Kate, who's like the matriarch of the Fortune family. He's recently learned that he is part of this family. He's like the illegitimate child of one of the sons of the family sort of thing, but he's been brought up by his mum and his stepdad. But Kate invites him over to offer him some sort of a business deal, and while he's over there he bumps into Robin, who is in charge of the gardens on Kate's estate, and there's an instant attraction between the two of them, but Robin isn't really that interested because, you know, she's got her career to focus on, and you know, she doesn't really is not really interested in what Amerson has to offer, and it's about the relationship between the two of them. I was expecting part of this to take part in Paris, just because the film is called Christmas in Paris, and I haven't seen the film yet, so I'm sort of wondering whether they take liberties with the storyline, but this one basically is set in Texas the entire time. So but yeah, I quite liked the business aspect to it. I liked finding out about the Fortune family. I liked discovering things about the area that they lived in Texas. Her family owned like a horse or owned horses and they went horse riding and things like that, and I really liked that aspect to it. So yeah, this was again fun, and I gave it 3.5 stars. Then I finally finished The Case Against Sugar by Gary Taubes. Towards the end of December, I was really trying hard to knock off some of the books on my TBR that had been, on my sort of currently reading list, that had been there for ages, and this was one of them, and I only had like 40 pages left in here. So I chipped away at it and I finally got it done. This is basically a non-fiction book all about sugar and sort of like the history behind sugar and then what it does to your body and things like that. And whilst some of this was interesting and I did learn a lot from it, I found it quite repetitive and not dry, but like it was full of a lot of medical jargon that you really had to get your head around. So in the last 2 or 3 chapters, I felt like I could only read about 10 pages at a time, because it just, yeah, that's all my mind could concentrate on at that particular point. So whilst I think this is important subject matter, I kind of feel like the title summed up the whole book, basically. Just don't eat a lot of sugar, because it does really horrible things to your body. And yeah, I don't know whether I'd recommend it, to be honest. I think I gave it 3 stars in the end. Then I read for the Kindle Unlimited readathon Walker and Chase, which are books 1 and 2 in the Strike County Fire Department series. These are really short firefighter romance novellas, really spicy, but each was like about 50 pages long, so if you want something short to read and you've got Kindle Unlimited, then I would definitely give them a go. I think each of them are only 99p anyway, so maybe if you're looking, again, if you don't have it, but if you're looking for something short that's going to grab your attention, then I would give those a go. I gave Walker 4 stars, I really enjoyed that one, and I gave Chase 3.5 stars. Okay, we're on the last 3. Next up I read Dear Santa by Karen Templeton. This is book number 1 in the Guys and Daughters series, and this is about a guy called, can I remember his name? Let's look it up on here. A guy called Grant, who is looking after his daughter, and at the very beginning of the book he finds out that her mother has been involved in a car crash and died, and they have been divorced for a couple of years, and he finds this really difficult to get his head around, because he's never had a particularly good relationship with his daughter. You know, there's not much of a relationship between them. I think his daughter's something like 5, and he just feels like it's going to be really hard to sort of like deal with her grief and things like that, and sort of bond with her basically. And then you also have Mia. Mia is his ex-wife's best friend, so she comes over to the house when she hears what's happened, and agrees to stay for a little while to help take care of his daughter, and then stays for a little bit longer when the apartment that she is renting, the lease is up and she can't renew it, and he has some sort of like granny annex at the back of his massive mansion basically. So she stays there, and it's about the relationship between the two of them. I really liked the way that grief was dealt with in here. There was sort of like, you know, Mia had her own party planning business, which was interesting to read about as well. Grant was really shut off in terms of his emotions, and it was interesting watching him develop as a character. Yeah, and again, this was really fun, and I think I gave it 3.5 stars. Another one that I finished that had been hanging around for a while on my currently reading is The Glass Castle by Jeannette. This is one that I started for non-fiction November and just only got about 50 pages in, and then wasn't really that enamoured by it. And in fact, this was on my 5-star predictions, so I'm not actually going to tell you what I gave this as a star rating. You'll have to find out when I eventually do a wrap up of those. I've still got 4 of those to read, by the way. But this is basically a memoir of Jeannette Wall's life growing up in a very unconventional family. And they did a lot of moving around, There are a lot of things that happened to them as kids, and the way that they were brought up that were just shocking, basically. And then it goes all the way up until pretty much present day, at different points. And I found the beginning of this quite slow going. I had to kind of really chug through it. But when we got to a certain point, it did pick up, and I ended up really enjoying it. So yeah, you'll have to see what I gave it as a star rating later. And then the last book that I read in December was Rescue Me by Kelly Collins. This is book number 1 in the Freezer Falls series, and I read this one because I have an arc of book number 2. I had an arc to read in January, so I wanted to read the first book in the series. And this is about Carl and her brother, whose name I can't remember now. They own a mill in this town in Freezer Falls, and the mill's not doing very well, and in fact they have a meeting at the very beginning of the book with this guy who comes from a company who wants to basically buy them out. But buying them out will involve effectively shutting down the mill, getting rid of all of the employees, and chopping down a lot of the surrounding forest that they have. So it's not particularly appealing deal considering like the local town and things like that. And then our hero is Owen, who is one of 3 brothers who own a construction business, and Owen is working on this green sort of house project, this eco project, which basically builds, the idea is for them to build houses that are more sort of economically friendly, and that sort of idea. And he's working on this pitch at this particular, I don't know what you would call it, like this, he wants to do this presentation basically at this place in order to get people thinking about it and buying into the concept of it. And he meets Carla, who, you know, it's a small town, but he didn't really know her in high school, and he sort of ropes her into the project when he hears about her failing business, because, you know, a lot of his houses are made out of wood, and obviously if he's successful then her mill will benefit from it. It's about the relationship between the two of them. I found the aspects to do with the business really interesting. I thought that was a really good decision on Kelly Collins's part. You know, we should be thinking and writing about these topics an awful lot more and what we can do to help the environment. And I did really like the relationship between Carla and Owen, and I think I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars. So there you go, guys. I don't know how long this video is going to be. Part of me thinks that if I get to a certain number of books in a month, then I should really do a mid-month wrap up. Let me know what you guys think of that. Do you like longer videos like this, or would you prefer if I've read a certain number of books in a month that I split it up into 2 parts? You know, what would be your preference? I'd love to get getting your feedback in the comments down below. Yeah, and chat to me about anything else. What did you read in December? If you read any of the books that I've mentioned? How did your 2019 reading year end? Any sort of highlights that you want to share with me? Love chatting to you guys as always. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.